parents, welcome. Now today we are going to be talking about parental alienation, its impact on the children, and we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Ben Hine, who is an applied psychologist at University of West London, and he's also actually an adult child of parental alienation. Dr. Hine, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you
And
for having me.
Thank you. And parents, please let me know if you can hear us okay, where you're coming from. And actually, let me know if you are actually an adult child parental alienation as well. We're always curious, we're always interested to hear from you, parents as well. If you have any questions, please post it in the chat room. I will try to pick up as many questions as possible. And it's going to be a very fascinating conversation today because I always appreciate an adult child of parental alienation sharing their story, because the thing is, there's a lot that happen behind closed doors. Now, as an alienated parent, you may have certain idea or thoughts of what is going on, but actually there's a lot of things that are happening behind closed doors that you don't know. And so this is your chance to hear really what's happening, and also inside the mind of your children, what possibly could happen and why it happened. Because a lot of the time you are shocked when you find out that you are an alien, and often you had an amazing previous relationship with your child, and then suddenly it just seemed like out of nowhere, you suddenly lost your relationship with your children. So, this is a chance to ask your question. And thank you, Alicia. I assume you can hear us okay. She's from St. Augustine in Florida. Thank you so much. So yeah, please let us know your question, because this is your chance to ask a question. The other thing that I really appreciate about Dr. Hine is that he's not just that adult child that lived that experience. He's also an expert in the field. Actually, you just have a book that just came out.
Yeah.
And there it is, Contemporary Guide to Parental Alienation. So today we're gonna, I hope that we're gonna talk first about your personal case as an adult child of parental alienation, and then we'll go into more kind of the solution from the perspective of being a psychologist. Please share with us your story. Like, when did it start to happen? How old were you? And do you have siblings, or what the situation?
Yeah. So my parents got married in 1988, and then I was born in 1989. And about when I was just over a year old, there were kind of the beginnings of cracks in the relationship that started to occur, mainly because my mother's illness had been hidden from everyone by my maternal grandparents, and that came to light. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when she was 16, and then that came out much later on to kind of everybody. And then there was, within that relationship, there were difficulties, and it was kind of deteriorating. But at that point, there wasn't any presence of parental alienation. Both of the parents were still in the home. I had a kind of loving relationship with both of the parents. My mother was becoming more ill, which did affect obviously what she could do, but for all intents and purposes, she loved me, she cared for me, and so did my father. And then one day, when I was 4 years old, my father left, and when he came home, I and my mother and all of the furniture and belongings in the house had gone. They'd been removed, and we had been.
Sorry, how old were you?
4.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so my maternal grandparents came with my uncle. They said to my mum, enough is enough. You're going to leave him. My mum took me back to somewhere where I was living at the time, which was about 45 minutes away. And with all the furniture, my dad came home, had no idea this was going to happen. Obviously, was completely confused, shocked, upset, etc. Didn't know where anyone was. And then that began a 4-year process, 2 years outside of the court system and 2 years inside the court system. And that 4 years between when I was 4 and 8 years old, which, as any developmental psychologist will know, is a really critical kind of age point for children, that kind of middle childhood point. That's when there was a process where I would be living with my mum and my grandparents for a week and 5 days, and then I would go to my dad for every other weekend. And across that whole period, there was a very subtle but consistent campaign against my father by my mother and my maternal grandparents, which kind of sought to kind of pit me against him. They would do lots of kind of very subtle things, and some were more overt, and there was, you know, incidences of violence towards my dad that I witnessed and things. So there was lots of behaviors which I can go into in more detail in a bit. It was mainly over that period, which was seeking to alienate me from my father as much as possible. At the end of that process, at the end of that court case, my father was given custody because of my mum's condition, and my grandparents were both ill by that point as well. So they actually withdrew the case 2 days before the final hearing. And the interesting effect then was almost a kind of reverse alienation, because my father and my stepmother, they had married in the middle of that period in 1995. Because of the trauma it had caused them, they then said, we're not having anything to do with the other side. And so inadvertently, it became very difficult for me to manage the relationship with my mother, who was obviously becoming more and more ill. And then, there were subsequent issues, again, which I can talk about in a little bit. But that's the general kind of timeline. And it was really between that 4 and 8 years old that there was this campaign against my father to kind of really drive a wedge into our relationship, so that I would want to stay, you know, with my mother and with my grandparents. And, you know, for all of my knowledge, obviously I was young at the time, I don't remember really any of it. Whether that's because I'm blocking it out, I don't know. But I've since had the court case file given to me, and you know, it was a very bitter, acrimonious you know, fight. And that's how I've always said, whenever I describe it, it's a custody battle, because that's what it was. It was a battle. It wasn't a discussion, it wasn't a collaboration, it was a battle. And I was in the middle of that battle and felt as such.
Wow. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? You're a child, and yet you're in the middle of this
Yeah.
while, you know, fire and everything being thrown across.
And you're in the middle of what are very adult problems, but as a child who has no comprehension and understanding of what that is like, and you shouldn't, because you're a child, so you should be kept away from those kind of discussions. And there are lots of other discussions that parents have on a day-to-day basis that they know they shouldn't be sharing with their children, because it's not age appropriate. You know, when my wife and I, when we talk about, I don't know, money, or when we talk about, you know, certain decisions that we're making, we obviously don't involve our children. Oh God, wow, I've literally just had a real revelation whilst I'm on this, because my son's 6, and when I think about, I've only just pieced together that he's the age. I've literally only just thought this through properly. But he's the age that I was when I was experiencing these things. And when I imagine what it would be like for him to be in that scenario, yeah, it makes me feel a lot even more sorry for my inner child than I had before, because sorry, that's, you know, sometimes you just get this moment of clarity, and I've only just realized, you know, he was right at the age when my parents started the court proceedings. And, you know, I think about the amount of stuff we protect him from, and the amount of stuff that we specifically don't talk about around him. I mean, it's funny, when I think of some of the things that we protect him from, I'm like, wow, you know, the stuff I was exposed to is like miles beyond what we don't do around him and what we don't say around him. I mean, and maybe it's because of what I've been through, but we're super cautious about how we speak to each other and what we discuss. And, you know, for example, any conflict that we have, if it happens, you know, if something, an incident happens when the kids are around, we park it, we put a pin in it, we never discuss it at the time. We say, okay, we'll, you know, we will discuss it, trust, you know, we'll look at each other and we'll go, look, we're going to discuss this because this is an area of conflict. We don't forget about it, but we put a pin in it because kids shouldn't be exposed to conflict. So then when I think to myself, gosh, you know, I saw my uncle pin my dad up against a car and threaten to smash his head in, you know, I'm like, actually, if my son saw that, I'd be devastated. You know, it's just yeah, it's crazy.
There's a comment in the chat room that said, "I bet that you're a fantastic dad," and I was just thinking that experience that you went through really, like I'm certain it influenced how you are as a father, right?
Yeah, but in positive and apologies if you maybe hear them every now and then. They're just obviously getting ready for bed here in the UK. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it has affected how I am as a parent, both positively and negatively, and sometimes those things are related. So yes, I think we are, especially myself, but as a couple, because my wife's been through all this with me. We've been together since we were 16, so she knows everything that's happened, and um, we are very, and I am certainly very diligent and paranoid about what we do and don't do because of my experiences. But at the same time, my experiences mean that I'm triggered quite a lot of the time as a parent. Sometimes simply by being a parent, because it will evoke this memory, or, you know, like just now when I was like, oh my goodness, I was like, oh, Theo's 6, and that's, you know, so there are all these residual things that as a parent, yes, it affects me in that I try harder probably to rectify it, but sometimes that adds up to too much pressure. Like we just had his 6th birthday, and, you know, I'll be honest with you, I had a bit of a nightmare really in terms of it triggering me because of the pressure that I put on myself to make it so wonderful because of my upbringing. And then if something does go wrong, it actually means that I go way worse, and I spiral and etc. So I think what that says more than anything is that these experiences that happen when you're a child, they stay with you for an awfully long time, and they affect the way you think, the way you make decisions, the justifications you give for things. You know, they stay with you. And something that might seem innocuous to a parent, because we know there are different types of alienating parents, and there are some alienating parents who don't realize what they're doing, and there are some that do it maliciously. But even so, regardless, you cannot underestimate the weight that some of those things have on a child. And even now, you know, I will become triggered at various different things. So yeah, it is a blessing in a way, but also a curse, of course.
Parents, really, if you had, like for me listening to this, I have so many questions, and
Yeah, well, any questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer anything. And of course, after this ends, I'll give, you know, my contact details are online. So if anyone wants to reach out afterwards, then I'm always happy to engage and speak with parents or anyone who wants to ask more. So
right, yeah. So parents, if you have questions, please do post it. So let's go back and let's kind of unpack it a little bit more. So I guess first of all, how would you back then first towards your mother? Like, did you became alienated, or how were you with your mother? No,
yeah,
actually,
so
oh, I'm sorry. It started with your father, right? The first
yes, yeah.
against your father. So how did that?
Yeah, so across that time, so my father and I, before my parents split up, we had you know, a healthy, loving relationship, um, and this is now how we really explicitly qualify parental alienation. So, you know, looking at William Bernay's 5-factor model, you know, we didn't have a negative relationship, he wasn't abusive, you know, etc. So all of these things that mean that it was alienation, it wasn't estrangement or anything else, because he was a hands-on loving dad. And also he had to be a hands-on loving dad because my mother was becoming more ill. So he actually probably did more than a lot of dads at that time did. So he really was involved, loving, which I think made it all the more painful for him. And this is what we've written about together in our chapter in another book, is actually that made it more painful for him to be accused of not being a loving and involved father.
I'm sorry, did you
Because
say that your father and you wrote that chapter together?
we've written a chapter in another book together, and I can share that. I'll email you so you can share with people. But yeah, for Dr. Liz Bates's book in the UK, we wrote a chapter on this as part of a bigger book on men's experiences of violence. And I can come to that later on in terms of where that fits in with the timeline, because that's been a big part of healing, is speaking with him about it in more detail. But at the time, as a child who was experiencing probably, and again, I don't remember a lot of this. This is what I've been told. I was a child that was dealing with a difficult situation anyway. My mum was becoming more ill, but nothing unmanageable. But then I was thrown into this situation where I moved town, school, everything, within the space of a few weeks. And it was a very abrupt move because I was relocated overnight. And then it was over those years a kind of, so one of the principal behaviors, as we know, is denigration, right? This campaign of denigration against the parent. And that was probably the principal alienating behavior that I experienced, because it was a lot of subtle digs at my father about him and his behavior and his role that led to me with an impression that, my father left my mother because she was ill, which is not the case. And I now know that, but at the time, that's what I was led to believe, that basically he couldn't hack it and he didn't care and that kind of thing, which then made it very difficult, because you have a huge, and alienated children report this often, is that you have this huge loyalty conflict between the parents. So that was one of the main ways, and it was other subtle things like targeting perceived joint interests. So when my father is like a huge fan of sport. He loves sport. He loves all different sports. You literally can't get him away from sport. And because my grandparents knew that, they would try and discourage me from sports.
Oh.
So you see how that's really subtle, because it did attack and it did hurt our relationship, because we then didn't have that shared interest that he was trying to have. And if on the face value, yes, there was limiting contact between the child and the parent, because I was relocated and then he could only see me every other weekend. Discussing inappropriate details. I'm just double checking my list here of factors. Denying the targeted parent access to important information. So I know that my dad had to fight quite hard to, get access to school records, school reports, etc., which we know happens a lot. And that's one of the ways that institutions can aid a targeting parent. Creating the impression that the targeted parent is maybe dangerous or unloving, which definitely happens. So, and encouraging the child to choose sides was a huge thing. I often had the phrase, don't you want to stay here with your mother? She's ill and she needs you, which is a huge burden to place on a child in terms of that feeling. So it was this kind of sustained but quite subtle campaign to damage that relationship for the purpose of causing hurt to my father, and inadvertently then causing pain and conflict to me, obviously.
Right. So you mentioned these very specific examples about alienating behaviors. Like trying to deter you from
Yeah.
interest in sports, and guilt tripping you and saying stay with your mother, she said, instead of going with your father. You also mentioned that he was very very loving, engaging dad. Could you give us some examples? Because I know you were very young at the time. What do you recall the kind of things that you guys were doing together?
Yeah, so I've only got a few pictures. 1 second. So one of the reasons why it's hard to piece together the picture is because my maternal grandmother actually burnt a lot of the pictures that we had of us as a family so that my dad didn't have them. But I do have a few. And you look at this picture, this represents a happy marriage. This was clearly a happy time, despite the 80s fashion. But my dad has an extreme love of trains and the railways, and we used to go on. There's a few famous train lines in Sussex and Surrey in the UK, and we used to go out, for family days out. And from his, explanation of that time, he was hugely involved in my care, looking after me, especially as my mum became more ill. Um, just things that I consider to be day-to-day dadding, as it were, picking me up from school, getting me where I needed to go, maybe signing me up for an after-school club or something, or obviously at that time it would have been preschool. But he describes how, for example, I was very bad at going from a cot or a crib to a bed. And he describes how for the first few nights he had to sit and hold the door shut on the other side whilst I had a tantrum on the other side, and then I would fall asleep and he'd come in and put me in my bed. Just the things we do for our kids. He, as I think most parents would if they were speaking honestly, and this is how I would describe parenting, is that, it was tough. All children are high demand, but he was a parent and he did it, and he loved his role. And so when that was taken away from him, and this is what a lot of the fathers in my research report, it's like ripping out your heart, because it's what your most important role is. It's what you're meant to be doing. And I always say to people, the reason I understand these men when they talk to me is because I know that if someone wanted to target me and hurt me, the main way they could do that is by stopping me being a dad and being involved with my children. So it was that's the alienation journey for a lot of parents, is they go from this loving, secure relationship to, well, whatever extreme some people have. I've spoken to fathers who haven't seen their kids in over a decade or decades, but they used to have a previous loving relationship. So yeah, it's that juxtaposition that I think is so jarring, and that's what separates alienation from other forms of contact refusal, which is why we are so clear on that. Because people say, "Are you saying anything is parental alienation?" No, parental alienation is a very specific form of abuse against good parents or good enough parents, yeah, it's devastating.
Right. Because I always think of this saying where they say children are like having children is like having your heart
Yeah,
walking outside of your body,
absolutely. Yeah,
and a lot of us actually, like, our children is our identity, and you take away that away,
yeah,
and yeah, it couldn't, yeah. So and I do see a bunch of questions for you. We'll pick those up a little bit later.
yeah,
They're
that's right.
really important questions actually. So yeah, thank you so much, Mara, and at least you have further questions. We'll definitely pick up those questions, I promise. Yeah. So you talk about alienating behavior. You talk about how so and how your dad was before. But what about you? Did you then? And then you talk about how you felt really conflicted because now you were put in the middle and start questioning your dad. Did you actually then turn? How did you behave towards your dad then? Even though, and now you had very little time with him. From having
Mm,
him all the time, suddenly now you barely see him at all. When you
mm.
did see him, how did you behave?
Yeah, it was such a confusing and distressing time, because the reason it's so damaging to children is because of that confusion and that destabilization. So basically that's how I felt at the time. And actually, I don't think I've ever really recovered that sense of not feeling a bit adrift in the world because you don't have that sense of security and that sense of safety. And this is why parental alienation is essentially an issue of attachment. Yeah. And that's why this is why it's covered so much in my book, is because what you're doing, and I think what people need to understand, is when you have a child and you have the parents or the caregivers around them, the fundamental task of that child evolutionarily is to figure out who in the environment is going to keep me alive and keep me safe. That's the principal guiding job of the child evolutionarily. And the job of the caregiver is to be that person. So imagine a sense as an adult, try and conceptualize it as an adult, where you get put in a place and you spend 4 years learning the rules of that place, and you have someone there who is your guide for this new location, and you get to know them and you say, oh, this person's got my best interest at heart. And then imagine if someone came along and said, everything about this is wrong. Everything about this is actually not true. This person who you think is going to take care of you is actually going to hurt you. You'd be freaking out. You'd be trying to figure out who's right, who's wrong, what the truth is. That's what you're doing, but not to an adult, to a child. And so the child, in this case, myself, I would spend those 2 weeks or just under 2 weeks with my mother and my grandparents, and maybe I would hear certain things and be told certain things and, etc., have this subtle campaign. And then I would go to my dad, and it wouldn't be the case. He would be my dad, and actually he spent a lot of that time overcompensating, so it would actually be very magical and fantastical, because every other weekend it was like going on a holiday, because it would be like, we're going to go out and do this, because they wanted to make up for or maybe negate some of the things I've been told. But actually that added to the confusion, because you're just swinging from these wild versions of this person, from this person who doesn't care and abandoned your mum, to Mr. Magic who's taking you out over places and wants the best for you. And so you're just throwing this child's brain around, and it's the confusion that results from that is incredibly destabilizing for the child, and they don't get to develop that secure base which Bowlby talked about so much, the psychological secure base, because we know that parents can successfully co-parent in 2 locations. People do it all the time. It's not about the physical space, although there are things to manage there. It's about the psychological sense of safety that the child has. And basically an alienating parent, or the actors within that circle, that's what they're seeking to, either maliciously or not maliciously, or without realizing the extent of the impact to the child. And I think this is what people don't understand, is they're destabilizing that child's sense of security, their sense of self. And this is something I've been exploring recently, is because the child doesn't have that safety and that security, they actually don't get to explore themselves, because they feel they have to be on guard. So actually you're robbed of childhood experiences, and what might look like a childhood. So what might look like family days out, and if I say these things, my parents would produce pictures of us at a theme park and say, look, we were a family on family day out. It's deeper than that. It runs deeper than that, and it's actually the destabilization undercuts what those experiences are. It's more about the deeper psychological sense of understanding who's going to look after you, who's going to keep you safe. So I think that's really my driving force now professionally, is to focus on the child and to really explore the impact on the child. And there's some other great work that's been done recently, again, that's covered in I think it's chapter 6 of my book. No, chapter 5 is on children. But it was a hugely confusing time that had, it's still, I mean, it ripples and ripples now, and this is, if I was say 6 at the time, it's nearly 30 years later, and it's still rippling through all of my experiences and the way I am and the way I think, and has a profound impact.
Yeah, and I saw even more question in the chat room, which yeah, they are really important. But I do still want to emphasize, like exploring this before
Yeah,
we get into the solution. And so you started talking, and actually some of the things that you talk about, I think you're referencing attachment theories for parents that are listening. But in summary, what Dr. Hine was trying to talk about is that this has such a big impact when you're looking at the attachment style when you're growing up, that
yeah,
become part of your identity and how you are in your future relationships. And then,
absolutely.
like,
Yeah, and not just in it, and because uh, as Bowlby's theory suggests, your parents become what's called your internal working model for attachment. So whatever you experience with your parents or your caregivers, whoever they may be, that becomes your almost your blueprint for how relationships, whether that's friendships, romantic, or your own children, that's the blueprint for how those relationships operate. And it's interesting because I can see how my insecure attachment with my parents threatened to manifest in the attachment I have with my own children, and has plagued my romantic relationship with my wife. And both of those have required a lot of work to identify, and work that is ongoing, I must add, and probably will remain so for the foreseeable future, to try and break that cycle, to reformulate my idea of attachment, which is a very difficult thing to do because our caregivers are the most important people to us. We have evolutionarily drives to bond with them and attach to them. So what they do is really, really important. And that's why I have, because of my understanding, both from my experiences and my work, tried to improve that for my children. I'm lucky that, I have my wife as well, who's much more stable than I am to help take care of them. But it's that intergenerational transmission as well that can then lead to more and more and more problems and that kind of thing, because like I said, children don't develop the secure base that they can then use to explore, and they fundamentally don't know what to expect from people. If you have an insecure attachment, you can either be insecure avoidant, where you think that really no one's going to look after your needs, you have to look after yourself. Insecure resistant, where you don't really know what's going to come, so you end up being quite clingy with people. And then insecure disorganized, which is basically a whole mess of things where you don't really know whether you're coming or going. So it has a really, really, really profound impact on how we then attach with others in the future.
right. So I was also that child, right? I was that
Yeah,
alienated child. And yeah, it definitely impacted me because then it translated into all the relationships that I
yeah,
have in my adult life. Like you said, the same thing is like anytime anyone get close, I wanted to pull away because
yeah,
I think subconsciously you had no idea this person is gonna turn out to be pulled away from you, either being robbed away from you by some other people unintentionally, or
yeah,
that they're going to turn nasty to you. So you
yeah.
can't get close. You want to protect yourself. And you pull
But
away.
it's a defense based on your blueprint, because if you are given a blueprint that people, most of the time, the blueprint that children who are alienated are given is that people cannot be trusted. That's the blueprint, because what you've said to that child is, that person you really, really trusted, they're actually out to hurt you. They don't love you. They don't care for you. So that's the blueprint you're then giving them. So it would be mad for us to think that that child would grow up and approach any other relationship from any other perspective other than, I don't really know what people are going to do, so I'll keep my distance. And I've had the same experience where, people have had to overcome, pretty significant walls to kind of get in and get to know me. And I still, to be completely honest, I still feel incredibly guarded, even with the most close people in my whole life. And even my own children, I get paranoid that they don't love me. That's the extent of it. That's what you're dealing with, is this fundamental wall that you have where you still, you're like 99% there, but there's still that 1% where you're like, I'm not sure about this. I don't know. And again, that's because you're dealing with a deep psychological wound that's been inflicted. And as we know, wounds, they may heal over, but they leave scars.
And we are talking about you who is conscious about this problem. Somebody done research into this and fully aware about this and conscious of working on yourself. And I am trying let alone a lot of alienated children grow up into adulthood, never realize.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I must just add, I don't want it to seem like, I've been aware for years and I chose to do my PhD on this and then I researched it. This is only in the last few years and I came to it by accident. So I was one of those children. I knew my parents had had a bit of divorce, but I just, I just joked about it. I was like, I'm a divorced child, classic, blah, blah. And it's only actually through, I did a project with a colleague that was looking at the experiences of men who've experienced abuse, but much more broadly. And all of them mentioned children being used against them. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Let's explore that a bit more. So we did another study. And then when we were analyzing it, and this was only 3 years ago, that's when it clicked. That's when I was reading it and I was going, I think this happened to me and my dad, And then I started to look into it. And then I started speaking to people about what happened at the time. And I started speaking to my dad and he was like, well, yeah, that was a big part of it. I've always not discussed it because I wanted to try and protect you, brother. So it's actually only been recent. And that's what I'm hoping that this book can help do, is if people think that they're suffering or think that they've been through it and that kind of try and reach those different audiences. Because I think a lot of people who, maybe feel the symptoms of the process in their adult life could potentially link it back to their previous experiences. And basically, if you're an adult who's, as a child, your parents separated and got divorced and you have trouble making relationships with people, it would be worth digging around and having a think about whether you remember any of these behaviors or have a chat with people involved at the time. But yeah, it's only been fairly recent. And again, like you said, I'm lucky that I'm in this line of work anyway. I'm obviously educated, I have resources as well. So yes, I have been able to pay for therapy to explore some of these things, but a lot of people don't have that. And I guess, again, that's part of the reason I wrote the book, is to give people an all-encompassing guide to try and help. But yeah, it's been a real journey for me as well.
The other thing that really hit me really hard is something that you said about how it destabilized the child, and then doesn't matter what, when you grow up, you never felt that sense of stable, and that's exactly like it doesn't matter that I have a home, I have a house, I have children, I have family. It doesn't. I always felt homeless, even to today.
But almost kind of like psychologically homeless, I think, because you can have, and this is the thing. Sometimes people are very good at still being quite high functioning, living their lives. And, I in the meantime have got married, I have a house, I have a great job, and I have kids. Psychologically, I'm a mess, and I have been for decades. And I'm starting to try and piece that together and to put myself together. But underneath the surface, like I said, and like you've just re-articulated, I still feel a little bit that sense of being adrift. And that's because the anchor that attachment gives you on a real fundamental level is really critical. So if you don't get the chance to develop that, or if that is attacked, that's really difficult to get back and to convince yourself exists. I've spoken before in therapy about questioning whether anybody unconditionally loves me. Still not 100% convinced on that, even though I've had those conversations, and even though the people who do or say they do would be hurt to hear that, it's still something that I can't convince myself of. And like you said, as much as I might have new relationships, my family unit here, I still get really, my son said something flippant. It was about 6 months ago. And he said it was just a flippant thing that children say, oh, I love mummy more than you. I had to go. I had to exit. And it was flippant. He doesn't know what he's saying. But for me, that was so triggering. And I was like, oh, in my mind, the 7-year-old is like, here we go again. And again, another thing I talked about with my therapist was, this idea that I'm always waiting for something to go wrong. And even though something looks like it's going to be great or is going great, I'm always waiting for something to go wrong. And again, that feeds back to that time of never really knowing what was going to happen next. And when I talk about the damage that was done, I mean, actually, a fair amount of it actually came after the court case had concluded, because where everybody was traumatized and didn't want anything to do with each other, I was then left essentially dealing with my mother's illness on my own. For a few years, I had my grandfather because he was still alive, but for a good 4 years after he passed away, it was kind of me dealing with that. And then my dad and my stepmom not really wanting to talk about it, which I understood. Well, I don't understand, because as a child, you just support the child. But anyway, they were so traumatized by the process that had happened. Let's just say they didn't make concerted efforts to try and get me to talk about it. So it's not as if they banned it, but it was clear that it wasn't really something I could talk about. And actually that was probably more damaging because I was older then. As a teenager, I kind of had more awareness of, and I remember countless train rides when I was going to visit my mum, just alone, so deeply alone in the world, listening to music on the train, just alone, feeling unanchored, unsafe. And then the nights, the period of time over which she passed away, because of everyone and how everyone felt and everyone just losing their own minds as adults, again, even at 18, I was the child left on my own. So I was with my mum in the hospital for 3 days, 2 nights while she passed away on my own. My dad didn't come because he didn't feel it was right, or it's too much for him. My stepmom dropped me there, and I thank her for that very much. And then she left, which I understand much more because there's a lot of complications there. But my uncle, who had power of attorney, came. We made the decision together to withdraw care. So at 18, I was part of the decision to withdraw care from my mum. And then he left because it was too much for him. So I then sat that night, the day that we decided to withdraw care, alone with my mum, knowing she was going to die, whether it's going to be hours or days. And just I think the profundity of and the depth of the aloneness and the loneliness is, I think, the main thing that I haven't yet recovered from and I haven't yet healed from. And that's what I'm working on, constantly at the moment, is trying to recognize that isn't the case, and I do have people. But something like that, it's deep. It's a deep wound, and to experience that as an 18-year-old, and a young 18 at that, because I was still in this suspended late childhood because of everything that had gone on. So it's not as if I was on the cusp of adulthood. So actually the fallout from the alienating behaviors was even worse. And it's led to all manner of issues later on, with delayed grief and suspended childhood and wounded inner child and all of this kind of stuff. So when you look back and think, it would have been a lot easier and it would have truly been in my best interests for people to actually bite their tongue and try and resolve things a lot more positively than they did.
That's very so traumatic. It's such a tragedy, and unfortunately, someone in the chat room said my 33 years old daughter is totally afraid to be alone. She told me when we reconnected that now she went back to the alienator. The 33 years old. Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Because even if, I think a lot of parents don't realize that even as adults, it doesn't mean that your child recognize things and be able to figure out what is what. It's yeah, because you're still that child when it comes to these emotional issues. This is not about the reality of things. This is about all these emotional trauma that happened when you were a child. Um, it yeah, the impact is really lifelong, unfortunately.
And just to add to that very quickly, it sometimes, and the way I've described it before sometimes is when, especially when I'm triggered by something specifically, I feel like my 8-year-old self in my 34-year-old skin. And I'm kind of still here pretending to be an adult, but actually the person you're speaking to and that has been activated at that time by that trigger is 8-year-old Ben. And so sometimes I react in ways that are incredibly childish and are represent that complete lack of kind of control and inhibition. But that's because you're almost speaking to a different person. Whereas when you have people who haven't experienced that trauma and they got a chance to be that child, they now realize that they are grown up and they are a consolidated being. They have a consolidated sense of self. And that's how I would describe, for example, my wife. And that's why, you'll never experience that with her, because actually her inner child isn't there residually kind of screaming and insecure and unsafe. She has a consolidated sense of self. Whereas mine is still very fractured. And so it depends on the day and the mood and the situation as to which Ben you get, really. And a lot of the work at the moment is about trying to bring those two together, and doing really simple things to try and heal and let that child be, taking up a hobby that's maybe childish, just to kind of let that experience happen. So I think the main message there, above everything, apart from my specific examples, is it's long lasting and it's serious, and we need to really seriously recognize that this isn't the case of a child hearing something and be able to deal with it, or kids will have to deal with it and they have to grow up. No, we must protect the psychological inner workings of children, especially in the context of separation and divorce. And I'm currently looking to line up and launch a few family court projects on that. But it's long lasting.
Right, and I saw Baker's comment in the chat room saying exactly it's like the child is stuck, the alienated child is stuck at the point when the alienation started, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's a part of, even though you're looking at this adult
Yeah.
child, this adult person, yeah, part of this is still that
Yeah.
unhealed childhood trauma. It keep them there; they're still stuck there as that child.
Because it's like when we moved house. I moved house as as a 6-year-old. That's how I experienced that process, because what our house move represented to me was instability, uncertainty, all of the things that obviously in reality to a much lesser degree, but to all intents and purposes represented that uncertainty and that terror to me of being moved around, not knowing where I was going to live. Because when you grow up, having social workers asked you, where do you want to live, who do you want to live with, that's a lot of, like, you carry that pressure, that uncertainty, that confusion. So when we were moving house, I acted and I did a lot of things that you would probably expect a child to do in that situation and to be in that situation, and I didn't handle it very well because I was triggered, and it brought out a different version. Whereas my wife found it stressful, sure, because moving house is stressful, but she was just kind of like, well, it'll work out in the end, or this will happen. um and that's as a direct function of, thankfully, the very stable upbringing that she had. So it really does, and it comes out in mysterious ways, and like the move, for example, but also when both of my kids were born, I was hugely triggered. What's meant to be a happy event actually was really psychologically distressing for me, because it brought up all sorts of things about love, unconditional love, and parenting and the pressure of doing things better and all, it just opened up a Pandora's box above and beyond the normal parenting struggles we all have, because we all know it's the toughest gig in the world. But if you're someone who's had childhood trauma, it's got an extra layer of unimaginable difficulty to it as well. So yeah, it's affected everything.
Right, and it's interesting you brought up that thing about you still question if anyone actually loves you unconditionally, despite you mentioned you and your wife have been together since you were 16, and your children, and you're still questioning it. And that's something the same with me. Like, it takes an enormous amount of effort from the other person to fight for our relationship for me to go, oh, maybe this, maybe they, I don't know why. Like, there's no way they could love me. Yeah, despite everything. And the other thing that you brought up is that some of us are very good at being functional human beings. So from outside, the rest of the society look at us and go, oh, that's totally functional human being. You're educated, you've got a, you doing things, etc. You look like you're normal.
Yeah.
Even, even consider, a high achiever even.
Yeah.
And yet, psychologically inside, you're just completely broken. And it translates into all this stuff in your relationships and not just how you, and how you see yourself and the rest of it. Yeah, the impact is crazy in terms of, and then it translates into, like you said, it's a it's an intergenerational problem. Because then it translates into your children and that kind of thing. And then also someone said, really, it's really special that you're still with your wife, because this was this long time, the most alienated adults just divorced. Yes. Most of, it's so difficult to maintain a relationship because you just don't know what a good relationship should look like. You don't know how to hold on to a relationship.
Yeah. And I mean, you alluded to it before. It takes a tremendously patient, loving, giving person to deal with us, basically, because we grow up into adults that are incredibly difficult to deal with. And I'm very thankful that she, for some reason, keeps viewing it as a good use of her time, because I don't think I would. if I had to be in a relationship with me, I think there are several times where I'd have said, you know what, this is just too much. And I think maybe because we've been together so long, and because she actually experienced a lot of it firsthand, I think maybe that's why she's a bit more understanding or forgiving than someone coming into it fresh, as it were, would be. Because we've actually known each other since we were 4 years old. So we've been in each other's lives for a very, very long time. And so I think she gets it maybe more than a person who I'd met at work might get it or something. But that being said, I mean, she is a saint, because it is very difficult. And one of the key outcomes for, like you've alluded to, for alienated children who become adults is difficulty in romantic relationships, because you don't have that blueprint, you don't have that internal working model, you often don't have very good communication skills. All of these things that are required for healthy, functioning relationships. And the real tragedy is that if these people end up having children within that relationship and then separating, there is the potential to again do the cycle of alienation, and to engage in those behaviors yourself, because it's an attachment issue. So if you are wounded in the terms of attachment, that can keep cycling, keep perpetuating on. So it's it's very difficult, I think. For me, and I don't know whether this is because of other issues, and because I've always struggled. I mean, they're probably all related, of course, but I've always struggled with depression, for example, and I'm thinking about seeking an adult diagnosis of ADD. But I certainly have always described existing as quite an exhausting process, because of everything that I carry with me and all of the thoughts that I have circulating around my head at any given time. And I think a lot of that is a function of everything that I just carry from that time, which again just speaks to the fact that we just need to center kids as much as possible whenever we're having these discussions and these thoughts and inquiries, because they're the ones that suffer so tremendously, and then it translates into adulthood as well, and it cycles through, as you said.
Right. Then the other thing is, you mentioned that about how the system somehow kind of, I don't know if it is quite innocent, but somehow they think that it is being considerate by asking the child, who do you want
Yes.
to live with?
Yeah.
I mean, like putting this enormous amount of responsibility on a child that will carry that burden for the rest of their life. Did I make the right decision? And I know I talk to adult children that to the rest of their life questioning that decision that they made, like putting this on a child to make that decision. And somehow the court thinks that, oh, this is in the best interest of the child, to ask the child this very adult question. So yeah, it's really crazy to.
And there's a lot of discussion around what we call the voice of the child at the moment, and there's a lot of discussion around it. And I think one of the things that I want to explore more in the future is that concept and around how the voice of the child is used, because there is mixed evidence on what children make of it. Me personally, it messed me up, and I wish I'd never been involved, because being questioned and being asked, it exacerbated all of that loyalty conflict. It exacerbated all of those feelings of feeling like the pressure was on you and it was your fault and it was up to you. So what that does is it adultifies children. It makes them act as adults when they're not capable. But there is other evidence, and again, there is a lot of evidence suggesting it might be age dependent, because teenagers particularly hate being excluded from the process. They like to have their say and their voice. So I think there is a lot of work that we need to do about understanding how to effectively allow the voice of the child to come into a court process. And I think some of that centers around how we ask those questions, how we get them involved, because I think often for children, it's a case of how you approach them and whether you make something explicit or implicit, whether because I know of plenty of cases where a child has been called up in front of a judge to give testimony. I mean, that's awful. And as much as the child might say, no, I want my say, it's our job to stop children doing that because they're not able to do that. Again, that might be age dependent, or whether we do it through other methods. So the final point I make about the voice of the child is that we know the voice of the child can be manipulated. So if you have a parent who is giving and training and guiding a child to say certain things in a certain setting, and they go and they say to them, so they parrot out a parent's phrase, if you have a social worker that isn't trained properly and accepts that at face value, that's an issue. So it's a really, really complicated one, because we want to make sure that children are involved in the process in a way that protects their mental health. Now, how we end up doing that, that's what we need to debate and discuss. But what we can't do, and what some people are advocating at the moment, is just saying we need to respect the voice of the child above everything else. We need to get them in, let them have their say, and then respect it. Because there's a lot of dangers in that, both for the child and for the alienated parent if they are being alienated. Very complicated, that one.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. It's not just straight black and white. There's layers to it. Right. I do want to pick up some of the questions now, because I think now is a good point to talk about solution. Hi, Claudia. She said, I'm so sorry. And Okay, so I guess one of the questions that I do want to pick up, because we talk about how destabilizing it is, how, how it's just insane, the kind of how abrupt it. For example, you got moved out of your home without any warning, and
Yeah,
school,
yeah,
and it's not just even in cases where there's no moving. It's a lot of abruption, like how destabilizing it is. So that the question here about how do we go about trying to restabilize our kids? What are
yeah.
your thoughts on that?
That's a really, really good question. And again, it's very, very complicated because it's every every alienated parent and every alienated child situation is different. So, for example, I am actually, despite everything I've said, I'm actually one of the lucky ones, which should actually give real cause for concern. If I'm one of the lucky ones and everything I've talked about, then imagine what some of the unlucky ones are like. Because I actually was given the chance to reestablish the relationship with my father because he was the case was withdrawn and I ended up living with him. Um, so it's hard to give advice in that sense because there are multitude different outcomes. Like I said, I've spoken to some fathers who are alienated, but they have 50-50 custody, but they still have this campaign against them. I've spoken to fathers who haven't spoken to their kids for 20 years and they have no hope of ever doing so. Um, so it's hard to kind of give a here's what you should do or here's what we should do. I think if I was going to give a guiding principle for each group, so alienated children and then alienated parents. So the guiding principle I would give relating to alienated children is that they they just need to be shown that there is the secure base for them. And how we go about doing that again is difficult because it depends on the level of contact you have, etc. And it feeds into the guiding principle for alienated parents, which is you have to just hang in there and keep showing your love. And the reason I say that is because even in cases where um, even in cases where it's severe and you might not have any contact, there are quite a lot of examples of where children age out. So they age out of these processes. They maybe get to a point where they can see through some of these behaviors and then they reach out. So that's my baseline guiding principle is never give up, never lose hope, because my dad and I have repaired our relationship in the last couple of years properly, and that was a good 15 years after a lot of the kind of key wounds, and 30 years or 25 years after a lot of the stuff happened. But it's really impossible to talk about solutions without speaking to people almost on a one-to-one basis, saying, okay, what is your situation? And it also depends whether people are engaged in legal processes, for example, because there is a whole raft of advice. Again, it's in the book. There's a whole chapter on advice in the legal system. There's actually two chapters on it, one about how PA comes through in the legal system and then one on advice. Above and beyond all of that, the most important chapter in the book is actually the last one, which is emotional and mental health well-being. Because whether you're an alienated child who's growing up and understanding these things, or an adult who was alienated as a child, or an alienated parent, and actually to a certain extent, an alienating parent, all of you require mental health help. And so my guiding advice is to seek support, whatever group that you are in, because no matter what processes or actions you're going to have to take, you're not going to be able to do it on your own. And I don't mean that in a practical sense, because there are legal guides and you'll get your solicitor, your barrister, or your lawyer, for example. I'm talking about well-being. I'm talking about emotional. So whether that's informal support systems and building up a group around you, your family, your friends, whatever, or whether that's services, charities that we have in the UK, for example, that's the most important. Because if you, as an alienated child or an alienated parent, if you try and deal with any of this just by trying to cope on your own, there's a pretty high chance that you'll end up dead. That's what the research suggests. 40% of the fathers that I reviewed in my project, this is out of 1,000 fathers, 40% of them approaching a service that we have in the UK were actively suicidal when they were approaching the service. That's the level that you're dealing with. As an alienated child, I have been on the brink of committing suicide twice in my life. Luckily, I've had people around me, and this is what I mean. You need to have people around you that are going to speak to you. They're going to talk to you. That's the guiding piece of advice around dealing with this. Before you get into specifics, is you will need emotional support, and it is a valid thing to explore and reach out about. That's the principal thing.
Right. So really, to be able to help stabilize your child, you can't stabilize your child if you are not stable.
Absolutely.
So, right. You cannot. So you need to be the foundation, and it's difficult if you have little contact or no contact. Obviously, very challenging. But if you have any contact at all, you have to be yourself stable. So, like you said, you need to build around you a support network so
Yeah.
that you can be stable, because going through, it's horrendous going through
Yeah.
alienation. It's, like this child that you love taken away from you, and you being painted as a monster when you are a loving,
Yeah.
broken parent.
Yeah.
Right. So then it's very traumatic, and then you're dealing with someone that at some point in the past you loved. This was your
Yeah.
ex.
Yeah.
All of that on top of whatever the unhealed childhood trauma that you experienced, whether you were an alienated child or not, you had unhealed childhood trauma. So all of that thrown in together, you have to find a support system. So it's either professional therapist
Yeah.
or not. You need that support network to stabilize yourself.
Because what do they say on the plane, right? They say you fit your oxygen mask first before you help others. And there's lots of different versions of that. You cannot fill someone else's cup if yours isn't full first, etc. And that is the guiding principle, because if we conceptualize parental alienation as a form of coercive control or emotional abuse, which it is, you're essentially, as the alienated parent, you're then tasked with the duty of trying to protect your child whilst trying to deal with the attack on you and your emotions. Now, you cannot show up for your child if you cannot first show up for yourself. And
Right.
whatever strategy you need to do, whether it's exercise, meditation, combined with formal, informal support, whatever you need to do so that you can remain. And I don't, hopefully this comes across as intended, because just to be clear, I'm well aware of obviously the impact that it has on parents. I'm not saying any of this is easy, and I wouldn't want to suggest that it is or be flippant about that. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot, for example, keep a level head in court. You cannot, for example, give the most of yourself to your child if you do manage to get contact, if you yourself are not taking care. And it's very difficult to not fall into a self-fulfilling prophecy of becoming the version that's being painted of you. Because it's very easy for alienated parents to then fall into that trap of getting angry, getting frustrated, shouting at a judge, shouting at your ex, breaking an order because you just want to see your kids. All of these things that actually, as much as I understand them, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, and I know I would be a nightmare as an alienated parent because I'd be bursting into courtrooms screaming my head off, but it doesn't help your child. And you have to be as oriented towards them as possible. Keep showing up for yourself so you can keep showing up for them. And eventually, hopefully, justice in either the moral or criminal justice system sense will prevail. And the saddest section of the book that I wrote was around how to deal with acceptance of potential long-term outcomes. So how to deal with this idea that maybe you won't see your kids for a long time or potentially ever, etc., and things like that. The advice is the same. because first of all, you never know, and you will never ever get the opportunity in the future. It will not exist as a potential opportunity if you don't allow it to. So the advice is the same. You have to show up for yourself. You have to advocate for yourself before you can then advocate for others, and you can put your case forward in a calm, collective manner. Because the biggest pitfall, especially for men, because it's playing into stereotypes, is to get angry and to get frustrated, because as soon as you do that, courts are all over it, and it's done. It's game over. So the resounding piece of advice, and it's difficult because from a theoretical and academic standpoint, the actual advice is a very frustrating thing to hear, because the actual advice is don't let it happen in the first place. But that's very frustrating because for a lot of people, it's ongoing. It's already happened. So, as much as we can say, well, actually, it should, if we focus as much as we can on shared parenting and 50-50, that's for us to argue to the legislators and the lawmakers, and the culture will try and get that changed so people in the future don't have to deal with this. For people right now, it's about staying alive. That is fundamentally what it's about. It's about staying alive, because this type of attack, this type of abuse, it drives people to the depths, and a lot don't resurface.
Yeah, and the thing is, for women, sometimes actually men too, you turn into the emotional breakdown. So you may even shut yourself from your children, and some parents go, you know what, because you're cold and rude to me, I don't need you, and then you turn and reject your child as well, and then that.
And you then fulfill the version that is being painted of you. And again, I don't say this in a condescending or patronizing way, and in a way that I think it's easy. I mean, it's the hardest thing in the world when you are being attacked and when you're being portrayed as something that you're not. It's impossible almost, but you have to let the love for your child power your willingness to stay present, stay focused, stay here, stay alive. But it's very difficult, very, very difficult.
Yeah, that's why I appreciate these questions so much, because what it says is that it tells me that you actually recognize that your child is a victim.
Yeah.
And that your child is where you need to focus. Because a lot of the time when you're in the middle of this battle, you forget. You're like, and yeah, it's about winning and that kind of thing. Sometimes you forget, and I am being victimized. I'm not that parent. I'm a good guy, and you forget that there's this child in the middle that needs protection. So those questions tell me that you are the good parent. You actually recognize that what's most important here is to protect your children, and that's so important. I wanted to mention that if you guys wanted to look back, we had one of the videos that I talk about emotional toolkit for parents. Because you need to have mental health support. You need to build a network around you to support you. People that may not be your family and friends, because a lot of the time family and friends don't understand what you're going through, and they may say things that really triggering and really unhelpful. But so you need to find the network of people that actually can relate to you, understand you. And alienation is such a it's such a strange thing that a lot of people don't get. People don't understand it. So unless they have experienced it, it's very difficult for them to truly relate to you. So you need to find people that understand that. But on top of that, you also should put an effort in to take note of what you can put into your emotional toolkit. What kind of music can cheer me up in the moment that I need?
Absolutely.
Can I take a bath? With candles on, or can I? Is there a particular? And that's why a lot of people end up with substance or alcohol abuse, because you get on the crutch of these things and it become a problem. So take notes of what are the healthy things that you can put into your emotional toolkit. Who can I call when you feel really down that can help pull me out of this? Put in, take note of these things so that you can have this emotional toolkit, so that when that moment comes, what movie can I sit down and watch when I feel really down to pull me out of this, that kind of thing. right? Is there a type of fruits that I can just, have on standby, snack, healthy snack, and things like that. So definitely, if you want to go back and look at our past videos and find that emotional toolkit video, and hopefully that is helpful for you. The other thing, so we talk about yourself, and then how you deal with your children. I know there's a question there about how to talk to, especially like teenagers, because actually teenagers is the most common, the most, I guess, vulnerable age when it becomes the target of alienation. It's because obviously once you're 18, you're out of the system. So it's actually a lot harder to fight at that point. The child either completely disappear or completely, right? So teenager, how do you talk to your child? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, because I think again, it depends. There are different age appropriate ways to engage on this topic. I think the thing is you've got to remember basically to be everything the alienating parent isn't. So even if the child is trying to draw you on these things, or if they're trying to understand what's going on, your your role is to treat them as the child they are. So don't get sucked into having those conversations. Don't get sucked into bad mouthing the parent back and saying they're doing this awful thing. Recenter the conversation on your relationship with the child. So recenter the conversation around, you may be told, or you may have heard this, and this. Here's what's going on. And I love you. I'm your parent. I will always look after you. I'll always keep you safe. Reorient the conversation around your relationship with the child. Don't, whatever you do, get sucked in to what the alienating parent is doing, which is either bad mouthing the parent or adultifying the child. So don't get sucked in about telling them the details of what's going on, or your relationship with the alienating parent, or anything like that that's going to damage the child. Again, that's age appropriate. So there might be slightly more that you can say to a teenager that you couldn't say to a 5-year-old. The guiding principle, though, is about bringing it back to you, the relationship that you have with the child, and the secure attachment that you're trying to foster with the child, and explaining to them whether, no matter what you hear or no matter what people say, you don't have to direct it even at the alienating parent. You don't have to say, and you shouldn't say, no matter what mummy says, no matter what daddy says. You say, no matter what you hear anywhere, I love you. And I will always look after you because I'm your parent. And I love being your parent and I love you. Reorient and refocus on that always. And foster that sense of security and normality that they maybe don't have, or is being destabilized by the other parent. And that can be about maintaining, if you do have contact, when you have contact, maintaining balance. Don't make every day a big day out, because actually big days out are quite stressful for children. They're not normal. Sit, play a game in the house, have a movie afternoon, create what you think would be. Here's a good rule: do what you would be doing if you were still with your partner. So if you were still with your partner and you weren't engaged in this battle, and you were seeing this child just like you were seeing them every other day, what would you be doing on a rainy Sunday? Would you be dragging them out and forcing them to go somewhere that's really expensive and really over the top? No, probably not. You'd be surviving parenthood like we all are, and you'd be doing Play-Doh or clay or whatever. So refocus on normality as well. Those are the two things. So focus on your relationship with the child and focus on providing them the normalcy and the security that is being destabilized and that they're not getting, because that's the most effective. If you then send that child back and the parent is in their ear again, they're much more likely to be resilient to it, having had that experience with you of normalcy and safety and security and comfort and those words, than they are if you engage in those behaviors that reinforce that idea of you, or go over the top and do all these magical mental days out and things like that. I mean, you should every now and then, and things like birthdays, etc. But that's probably the most important thing.
Right. I remember an interview that we did with Dr. Amy Baker, and you guys can find that video as well, that we did. And this is, I think, a really good advice from her is a filter that you would use anytime you have interaction with your children is that you want to communicate three things. One, I am a loving parent, I am a
Yeah.
safe parent, and I am
Yeah.
a valuable parent. Those three things. So
Yeah.
before you say anything, before you do anything, you think, does this communicate that I am a safe, loving, and a valuable parent? I think that's such a good filter. That's one
And
thing.
that's why Amy Baker is the wonderful, wonderful person and researcher that she is, because that's such a nice, succinct three-step thing that I'm going to make a note of. Because that's exactly what, I was suggesting, in terms of reinforcing this idea to the child of who you are, that will counter anything that they're getting from the other person. So yeah, that's really great. Loving, safe, and valuable.
Another thing is that you want to help build your child resiliency against alienation. So there's another interview that we did. I forgot her name right now. Yeah, Dr. Lilac, about actually she's an expert in cult culture, because we were drawing parallel between parental alienation and cultic culture. It's actually very similar.
Yes.
Really, you could say parental alienation is a particular form of cult. And
Yeah.
so her advice is to build resiliency into your child is to build critical thinking into your children. So there are different ways that you build critical thinking in your children. And it starts with empathy, building question, like asking question. So, instead of when the child says something, instead of trying to address that and enforcing your version of what you think the solution is, asking your child, why do you think, how do you feel,
Yeah.
what makes, all of these things, like, does that make sense? What
Yeah.
about this? What about that? Right? And then also often asking yourself question of, okay, if your child says something about, oh, there's this thing in the news or this happened in my classmates, asking question, how do you feel about that? What would you
Yeah.
do? And help guiding your child through the critical thinking so that your child have their own thinking, so that when they are faced with alienators, they ask the kind of question
Yeah.
that they ask, and then they will
Absolutely. And even if they don't say that explicitly, and sometimes it's not a clever move for a child to say that to an alienating parent, because they could, it could backfire. But even if they're just thinking it internally and processing that information in a different way, and you're absolutely right. If you're an alienated parent and you get time with your child, and if they say things or they accuse or they suggest something, yeah, absolutely, prompting those questions. Does that make sense to you? You know, does that fit with what you know about me? Have you felt that way this time that we've been together? No, then why not? What does that maybe suggest? Yeah, just I think that's a really good piece of advice as well. I completely concur with that.
Right. And then the other thing, the last thing that I want to add here is that in order to also build resiliency for your child, against alienation, is to obviously enforcing the relationship, the love that you have with your children. And so we have also a past interview, and this is from me, is that to enforce that, you wanted to look at a number of things. One is sensory. So how do you build? You think about taste, smell,
Yeah.
sound, all these things, right? So you wanted to one, draw back memories of the past by going, oh, remember, the time that we
Yeah.
went camping, and the wood fire and how we toasted, things like that, touch, all these things, right? Oh, feel this, does it remind you of this? You wanted to, because that's how our memories are anchored through the sensory. And so to build your relationship, you wanted to build through the sensory. And then also the other thing is there's another book. There's a book about love languages. So trying to,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So love languages of your child. How do you communicate love to your child so that your child can perceive your love to the child? Because some child love to hear that you say that you love them, but some child actually experience love differently. So
Yeah.
understanding that. So those are the things that I would say that really important in helping the child, build resiliency against parental alienation.
Yeah.
And then you also talk a lot about sheltering the child from adult problems. That's so important. because you don't want to then become the reverse alienator. You turn
Yeah.
around and alienating, and how traumatic it was for the child to experience it from the other side. You don't want to double up on that, because the impact is not just double; it's a synergetic
Yeah,
negative.
but I also think it's very, you've got to so for example, in my parents' situation, I think they they sheltered me, but to the extent where it was too far. There just nothing was discussed. So I think what they should have done is, yes, they should have sheltered me from everything that specifically happened and everything that was said, while still engaging with the fact that I had other family members that I wanted to obviously be in contact with. So I think sheltering has to be a kind of informed sheltering. You've got to understand, okay, this child is 12. What should they know about and what shouldn't they know about? And if people are unsure, Google it, because parenting doesn't have a handbook. A lot of us don't know what's appropriate. I mean, I said something the other day. I mean, it wasn't anything like completely ridiculous, but I think I used the word moron or something around my son, and my wife just said, "Oh, I don't think you should use the word moron." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're probably right." So it's just everyone's finding their feet, but I think some things are more obvious than others. Should you talk about the ins and outs of a marital breakdown with any child? No, probably not. Um, and so again, that's another reason why it's so important to have support in place, because if you don't have that, sometimes the child can become the outlet for those problems. And that should never be the case, because it robs them of the opportunity to be a child, because it draws them into that position of caregiving and emotional need meeting, which is very common in alienating parents, where they look to the child for their emotional needs. So yeah, definitely censoring what you say, but in a way that still understands what the child needs from you.
Right. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, like, you notice that, especially with recently the situation with the UN, like with what happened with you, you lived through this. I
Mm.
lived through this as a child. I was there. I was not there to get even with my exes. I was not there to
Yeah,
increase or lower child support. I had no motive in this. I lived through that as a
yeah.
child. And yet there's people now trying to deny that parental alienation is
Yeah.
real. How do you feel about that, and what's your thought on that?
Well, I'm double victimized as an academic and a survivor. So I obviously feel it on a personal level, because it's someone specifically saying what you went through isn't real, or what you went through isn't what you think it is. And I find that incredibly patronizing. And I sometimes have people commenting on posts that I make or tweets that I make saying, "Oh, are you sure you know what you went through?" And I'm like, how can you question you know nothing about me other than my public profile, and you have the audacity to say that to me. So I feel it on a personal level, but I also am very professionally affronted by it, because I'm an academic. I'm empirically an evidence-based person, and I have a book here that is crammed with academic evidence, and papers, articles, other books, from myself, that I've done academic work on it. The brilliant Jennifer Harman, for example, Ed Crook's work, Demosthenes Lourandos's work, Bill Burnett's work, Amy Baker. There's the Italian team, Verrocchio, who's doing a lot of stuff on children, Morales' review, Vahar. The list goes on and on and on of people researching in this area. Mandy Matthewson. Just trying to think if there's anyone massive I've forgotten to name. But you have all of these big names, people who do it professionally in and out. They're publishing peer-reviewed, highly respected, high-impact journal articles, and none of it was referenced in the UN report, which realistically makes that report not worth the paper it's written on, because we all submitted the research, we all submitted the evidence around PA. And if you're going to have a process where you just ignore evidence, it's not worth the paper it's written on, I'm afraid. So largely my advice is to ignore it. because it's an invalid report. The problem is that it doesn't matter if we ignore it, it matters if the UN ignores it. But none of the recommendations that were made in the report were taken up by the UN Council. So that hopefully gives a suggestion as to how much stock they put in it. But it's extremely difficult, and it's very difficult when you then operate as a researcher and you speak to people. I have people contacting me, as I'm sure you can imagine, all the time with their stories, and a lot of them have said, you know, it's difficult to hear from my policymakers and my MPs and the charities, some of the charities in the UK, that they don't think it exists, or yeah, but it shouldn't be called PA, and all the while we're not focusing on the children. And I would defy anybody to sit with me in a room for 2 hours, or on this for 2 hours, or sit with survivors and not come away with a profound sense that this is abusive behavior, it's serious, and it affects a lot of people. And that's I mean, my only advice again is to engage in activities that protect well-being and mental health. And when you feel that you're getting that way and sucked down, is to come out of it. I mean, I have to take breaks from Twitter, or now X as it's now called. I have to take breaks from that regularly so that I don't get bogged down with what I see. So it's a tough space. It's a really tough space.
Right, and I mean, you just mentioned that for people to recognize it is abusive, and today we talk about the impact on children. We haven't even touched on the impact on the alienated parents.
Yeah.
But you've done research, and you kind of mentioned briefly about how it increased the rates of suicidal, but there's so much, even alive parents, the kind of trauma that they're living through. They're living through.
It's I mean, yeah, the focus should always be on children, but yeah, for the parents, and from speaking with my father about his experiences, I mean, you're dealing with all sorts of things, you know, ambiguous loss, grief, because they're grieving a child that's still physically alive but they can't see. You know, you've got shame and guilt about, you know, the role that you might have played in the relationship breakdown. You know, stress, anxiety, depression. There are huge financial implications often for an alienated parent, especially if they're fighting in a court process to see their child, which in the US is several hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an outcome of any kind, let alone a successful one. Similarly, in the UK, it's tens and tens and tens of thousands of pounds. You know, effect on, again, even, you know, its effect on future relationships, because attachment is a dynamic system. You don't form it in childhood and then that's your lot. It can change for the better or the worse. So if you're in a loving relationship and all of a sudden that partner turns around and is attacking you and is saying that you're going to find it hard to trust people, right, in the future. And all of the parents that I speak to said, yeah, it's difficult to be in new relationships because I don't know who to trust. So yeah, I mean, alienated parents are hugely affected. The most severe and the most principal risk being a hugely increased risk of suicide.
I also wanted to bring up about I kind of forgot. Apologize, somehow I suddenly go blank. But yeah, like yes, I do want to say about the Human Rights Council at the UN, about the report. You said, okay, they didn't kind of say anything or do anything about it. I remember this meme going out recently. I see it a lot through social media that said you don't need to take malice to cause a huge amount of damage. Even just standing aside and doing nothing. I mean, this is not exact quote, but the substance of the meme is saying. And I think it's so true, and that applied to me, to the Human Rights Council, is that you have this report that is so damaging, and you need to take some kind of action. You can't just ignore it. Yeah, okay, it's great. You didn't just go, oh yeah, this is a great report. Yeah, we appreciate that. But I think you need to take action and stand up and do some kind of investigation. We need investigation into why within the UN system, you end up with this report that is just littered with fraud and misinformation and just outrageous. I
agree. And the difficulty is that this has now been presented and turned into a political issue. It has political connotations attached to it, and and this is a great irony in the end, because an attack on that report is seen as an attack on women, because the report is about trying to reduce violence against women, which is absolutely absurd. Because first of all, any academic that I know that is advocating around parental alienation has never and would never suggest that there are not some circumstances where men use court systems to be abusive. Of course they do, as do women. So no one is saying, no, the reverse isn't true. All we're saying is, yeah, but parental alienation as a distinct phenomenon does exist. So to then present us as people who are then attacking women is absurd, because what we're trying to do is actually protect women, because half of all alienated parents are mothers, and half of all the children who are alienated are girls. So it's presented as this political issue, and that if you're a PA advocate, then you hate women and you're against women and you're protective of abusers. And again, this is another affront to me professionally and personally, because that really, really upsets me, to be called someone who, I had a Twitter thread once that got kind of piled on, and people were saying I'm an abuser protector and I'm a paedophile protector, and I'm just trying to help abusive men. And it just couldn't be further from the truth. I have so many wonderful women and men in my life. What I want to do is protect people from harm. And I would want to protect my son as much as I'd want to protect my daughter from any future harm. It's not a gendered thing. The problem is that that space and the violence against women and girls space is very powerful, very politicized. So when what you're actually trying to do is present nuances to the complexities around VORG and what it involves, you're seen as attacking it and invalidating it, which is a joke. Because I've spoken to just as many, I've done research on fathers specifically, but I've spoken to just as many mothers who are alienated. And I've got a whole series of studies hopefully coming out later this year where we looked at alienated parents. We looked at mothers and fathers and their experiences of court. And guess what? Everybody has a terrible time. If you're an alienated parent, doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you're alienated. So yeah, it is very depressing, the kind of state of affairs that we have, where people can't stand up robustly and say, this is a substandard report for these reasons. Because, half of that report I don't actually disagree with, because there are valid concerns around X, Y, and Z, specifically around women's abuse in court, and also how parental alienation is sometimes misused. It is sometimes, because sometimes people use it erroneously. Same with abuse. However, the other half of that report should have been, and parental alienation itself in its properly assessed form is a valid form of abuse, and it affects women and men, and we need to tackle it. But that other half wasn't present, sadly.
Right, because if you have something that is potentially misused, which is everything actually.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, when you're dealing with an abuser, they will intentionally misuse things, obviously. So if you have something that can be misused, what you should do is actually encourage more effort, more research, more study, more support system.
Precisely.
Into that, because not by denying that it's real, or not by saying let's just change the name. Because if you change the name, then how does it stop an abuser from again misusing the new name?
Yeah. And that's always been my response, is the response to this phenomenon or this issue is education and further research, not pretend it doesn't exist. Because how many people do you have to have on these lives, on these streams, on these podcasts, coming out saying, yes, this happened to me? How many of those people do you need to hear and listen to before you go, okay, yes, this is a real phenomenon? And again, I've never argued that maybe the court system isn't trained properly enough in PA. It absolutely isn't. I know that. But the response is then not just to go, okay, well, PA is not real and we're not going to call it PA. The response is to go, okay, well, should we get these people some training then? So it's maddening, absolutely maddening.
Right. I know I've been holding you for a long time. We run way over time. So before we go, do you have any final thoughts for parents or adult children or anybody really out there about parental alienation?
Yeah, so the final thoughts kind of echo what's in the book is hold on. There are people out there that know what you're going through, that understand what you're going through. And you have to show up for yourself in order to keep showing up for your child. And if it's speaking to, for example, an adult who's been alienated as a child, the same applies. You have to show up for yourself in order to improve things for maybe your relationships or maybe your subsequent parenting relationships. And you can do that by engaging in that support seeking, emotional well-being, all of these things that are outlined. But that being said, the other thing I understand is how difficult it is. As an adult child myself, it's a struggle every single day that I deal with in one way or another. And as a researcher who has spoken to hundreds of parents who are alienated, and including my own father, I truly feel the depth of your despair, because even imagining being in that situation is enough to send me into a spiral. But yeah, keep showing up, keep holding on. And I don't want this to be like a plug, but this hopefully will be really helpful. If anybody wants to get it, it's Parental Alienation, a contemporary guide for parents, practitioners, and policymakers. And it's on Amazon. And it's getting good reviews as a kind of, the whole point is that it's the first kind of accessible text that kind of cuts through everything and brings everything together. Because we've got some great books on it already from the academic side and the lived experience side, and this is trying to blend. So yeah, if you want to take a look, then do take a look. And the last thing is, please, if anyone wants to reach out, ask anything else, or follow me on Twitter/X, then please do. I've also started, for my sins, a TikTok. It's just at Prof Hine if anyone wants to follow me on TikTok as well. But this has been really great. Thank you so much for having me on, and I hope it's been helpful for people listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And parents, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you. Please help us by sharing this video, by liking this video. If you're not comfortable sharing it on your personal profile, maybe share it with different groups that you are in where you think this could be helpful. If you have more questions, feel free to post it in the comments, because we'll try to answer that later, or even in the future video if possible. And if you haven't already, please follow us, sign up to our mailing list on our website, beacontohero.com. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Hine. Really appreciate you, and everyone.
You're welcome.